revolution.radio and go up to the donation section. There's snail mail. Hey, it takes a while to get there, but it does get there, guys. Cryptocurrency, if that's your thing, there's Bitcoin, Bitcoin Cash, and Ethereum. And the way that I think is the simplest and the best way is through Patreon, where you can select an amount that you want to donate every month, and Patreon takes care of it. And that way, guys, through your generosity, your donations, you are ensuring that these shows continue to stay on the air, and Revolution Radio continues to be here every day for you guys. And it's an incredible thing. So thank you guys for everyone who is supporting. It's you guys keep us here every day, so thank you. And with that out of the way, like I was saying at the beginning, I'm super excited. I brought a panel of guests with me to discuss. If you guys do remember episode 1, I did have one of the people that are on the panel on that show, Greg Fernandez Jr., and we did talk about this case, the David Crowley case. And this is an interesting case. It is one of the few cases where I actually went and started looking at the evidence myself. I started looking at lab reports. I was looking at the police reports. I was looking at autopsy reports, at his David Crowley's journal. I was looking at everything. And it was one of the few cases where I walked out with more questions than I had going in. These things did not really clear anything up. They made it worse. I have more questions now than I had before. So it's a very interesting case. So I just want to go ahead and welcome everybody to the panel. We have Greg Fernandez Jr. Welcome, Greg.
Hey there, how are you?
I'm doing great. Thank you for being here. We have Sophia Allen, who has been on the show before. She was on my Saturday show. So welcome, Sophia.
Hi.
Hello. And then we have first time Catherine Michelle, who was one of the first people I actually video interviewed for my YouTube channel. She was the first person actually, and this was the case that we covered. It was a great show. So go to my YouTube channel, guys, and check out. It's the very first interview I did, so you can't miss it. Welcome, Catherine, to the show.
Thanks, Rick.
It's so great to have you here. And as I was saying, it's great that it landed on a holiday. That was not planned. I did not have any idea when I planned this that this was going to end up on a holiday, but it worked out. And I'm happy to have all of you here. Hopefully, I'm going to have Dan here. I'm keeping my eye open for him, Dan Hennen, who I also asked to join us. So I will keep my eye open for him, guys. But anyways, Greg, I'm going to put you on the hot seat, guys, because I know there's a lot of people. I'm hoping most people that have been listening to my show kind of know the David Crowley case because we have talked about it, like I said. I've had you on, I've had Dan on, I've had Sophia on, and we have covered this case. But for people that maybe don't know the David Crowley case, can you give us a little bit of a foundation to work off of here and let people know who David Crowley was and kind of what happened, and then we'll go from there.
Sure. So David Crowley, a former U.S. soldier who served this country. He was accused of a double murder and a suicide. The bodies were found, the bodies of him, his wife, and his daughter, 5-year-old daughter, by the way, all three are under 30 years old, were found on January 17th, 2015. There were a lot of questions. David Crowley was working on a project called Gray State. There were a lot of fans, a lot of people that have been waiting for almost 3 years for this film or for something to happen with this project. And David Crowley's working on it. Everything looks good. And then all of a sudden, he ends up dead within 24 hours, if not earlier, within at least a maximum of 24 hours. David Crowley is accused of killing his wife, killing his daughter, and then killing himself. And the question that we've been asking is, well, what proves David Crowley did any of this?
Right.
Who else did they look at? What other evidence? But what solid evidence? You would need some solid evidence to say, okay, this is what happened. The police walked into that crime scene. They say within just looking at the crime scene, they were able to pretty much solve this whole case. That's what they're telling us. Who really thinks that is really accurate, that is true? And why would they jump to this conclusion that David Crowley did this? This guy was a filmmaker. Like I said, he was a soldier, served tours during some of the worst wars that we've ever seen, that this country has ever seen, at least in our lifetime here. He served in Iraq and in Afghanistan and saw some horrific things. Let's just put it like that. But the crime scene itself, what would you expect when you walk into a crime scene and you say, okay, well, this guy obviously killed his wife, killed his daughter, and killed himself, what would you expect to find? And that's what we've been looking for. And that's where I started. And I'm still asking that question. What could they have possibly found within 24 hours that they would think the public is not in any danger, and the guy who committed this crime, they have him, he's guilty, and he also happened to shoot himself with no suicide note. And then we can go on and on from there, but
right.
hopefully
Yeah.
that jumbled answer answers it.
Well, no, that's perfect. It does give, like I said, I wanted to kind of lay a foundation for people who might not know this case. And then hopefully after this, it will inspire people to look into this case. And as I was saying at the beginning, it was one of the very few cases where once you start diving into the evidence, I thought it was going to clear up a lot of my questions. And now I got more than I had before I looked at it. People say, look at the reports, look at the police reports, look at the lab reports, look at, all of the reports that are out there. Even I looked at his journal. I have his scripts that he wrote. I have those. I looked at everything I could possibly look at, all the pictures, and I walked away with more questions than I ever walked in with. And I still have a lot of questions, and it's one of those cases. So thank you for Greg for at least giving us a bit of a foundation that hopefully people now can understand where we're coming from. It's also, I'm not sure if I was kind of trying to see if you mentioned that he was stop loss, which I think made him very upset too. If you remember that, I'm not sure if you brought that up because I was trying to set things up here. So, which was interesting. Yeah,
I didn't, but yeah, he was. So he should have gotten out, I believe in 2008, he should have gotten out. Didn't get out until 2009. So I've had family that have also been stop loss in that same horrific war. I'm trying to use my words carefully here because I know we're on radio, but yeah, so that is another thing. I don't know if he was really bitter about that. I know that I've heard that theory, and I know people may have their own thoughts on that, but he kind of joked about it too. So in his journal a little bit.
Very interesting. Right. So I'm now going to go to you, Catherine, because I want to, thank you for being here. As I said at the beginning, you were the first person I actually interviewed for my YouTube channel about this case, because I was watching all the content that you're putting on YouTube, and you were looking at a lot of the evidence and asking questions, which I think is a great thing. I don't think that's a bad thing to look at anything and ask questions, especially with a case like this. Why this case, Catherine?
I still I still ask myself that same question. What is it about this case that just sucked me in so far? And I really think a lot of it is the fact that it is so clear to me through the evidence that was provided that this guy was a victim of murder. And instead of being touted as a victim, he is, accused of being the perpetrator. And it's infuriating. I mean, I spent a lot of time with our military. I was an EMT, so I did the majority of my EMT work on military bases across the United States. And so the military has a special place in my heart. And it was to see one of our soldiers who is clearly not only innocent of slaughtering his family, but it's clear that he was also murdered, to have so many people just jumping on the bandwagon and just saying, yeah, he's guilty, you slimeball. And the things they say about this man, I don't like that. It's like the injustice of this case is what really drives me.
Thank you. That is awesome. Sorry, I got Dan here. So I'm trying to get Dan in here, guys. So
okay.
That is awesome. It's one of those cases that really, when you dive into it, as I was saying, I can't say it any simpler. I have more questions, and then when you start looking at the evidence, they keep piling up the questions, and then and I know you've really dove into this case. You've looked at everything. I mean, you're really diving in and looking at the evidence, and you're going by what is in the files. You're going by the evidence that is out there for everybody to look at. Greg makes sure that he provides that on his website, so you can go to thegraystage.com, and everything is there, guys, that you can look through it and come to the conclusion, by what you read and what you see. He makes it very simple to get all of that information to you. And so I just want to go to you now, Sophia, because I do know that you've done a lot of investigating on this case too. You've been on Greg's podcast. You've been doing work with Catherine for her YouTube channel. You guys are doing a lot of content there, looking at different aspects of this case. So I'll ask you the same question. What drew you to this case? Like, why this case?
When I watched the documentary, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was lied to, that I was gaslighted into trying to believe that David Crowley was guilty of this horrific crime. And so when I started looking at the group and reading the posts that were in the group and the documents and everything, I wasn't seeing where he was guilty. I was seeing the accusations, but there was no proof of his guilt. And then the more information that I would send off and receive with the FOIA requests, thinking, okay, this is going to give me my answers now. There was just more questions. Yes, we would get a couple of answers, but we would get like 100 more questions in regards to this case. And none of it pointed to David's guilt. If anything, it cleared him of this crime. And so that is why I've stuck with this case for so long. You know, I'm still even fighting to this day to get more information. You know, it's just all the craziness connected to this case with,
Right.
I mean, between the city attorney and,
Yeah.
you know, people fighting us over this. It's like they're so bound and determined to say that he's a horrible person, but they don't show the proof.
Right. Yeah, and I remember I had you on my Saturday show. That was a while ago. We were talking about that documentary that was on Netflix, and then it was on Discovery Plus. And I found it on BitChute. I haven't found it anywhere else. It's kind of like that's the last place I found it, where it still is. So if you do want to check it out, A Gray State, guys, you can see that documentary at BitChute, and it's still there because I just looked at it recently. Definitely an interesting when you look at that. And I know that, Sophia, like you were saying, that's what really got you really diving into this case, was when you kind of
Right.
saw what they were doing there. So very cool. And I'm happy that we got Dan Hennen here. Thank you, Dan, for joining us. I'm so glad that you can make it. Welcome. I've had you on the show before, but this is definitely the first time having a panel of all of you that are doing so much research into this case all here at once. It worked out perfect because of the holiday. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Crypt Rick. This is good.
Yeah, a lot. I was going to actually start off with you, but we kind of had to go to Greg, and because you were the first person that done the Facebook group, Justice for David Crowley and Family, the Facebook group, and so I was asking everybody on the panel, so I'm going to ask you this question too. What drew you to this case, and can you maybe talk a little bit about who David Crowley was and all the things that fall under that?
I was notified of the case from a friend of mine who sent an email link just to say, look, you may want to check into this case. It doesn't sound right. It sounds strange. And Greg and I were both working in the Philip Marshall case, which is very similar, where a father and two teenage children each had a gunshot wound to the head along with the family dog in a reason to silence this 9/11 author in California. So this came up right on the heels of that, and I got a message that just says this time they skipped the dog. The dog was living, but everything else sounds exactly the same. So that got me into it as far as looking at it. I did not know David Crowley. I lived in Minnesota. I still do. I was not aware of the Gray State project. Did not know David Crowley. Was not aware of the project that he was even working on. But because I lived before where I currently live now, I lived about a 5-minute walk from the David Crowley home. Same neighborhood. I lived in Apple Valley in the same part of town that David was, probably 5 or 6 blocks away. So very, very close. And so that's what really got me interested in it. And then, found out about, the wife, the daughter, and things like that. So jumped onto the case as well. That's really all I knew about David. I was going after it more from a justice perspective because it seemed like a hit. It had all the hallmarks of a hit, an assassination to wipe someone out and a family. it was quickly covered up by the news, the press, and the police department, and everything was all kind of shut down. And so that's what raised my antenna, so to say, to look into this a little further.
Very interesting. Yeah, I remember that too. That I just remember when I first interviewed you. Yeah, and you really were really quick to look into this. And then when you made that comparison to the other case, and it's as you said, the dog was the only thing that they basically kept alive in this one, and who's been blamed for everything under the sun, as we know. And I hope people do look into it and start looking into this case. Greg, what is some of the evidence? I know that you've even done a few just 3-minute videos where you've kind of just asked questions. And what are some of the questions that lead you to believe that it is not what they're saying, what they report? Like, what is the evidence that you're looking for? What is it? What is lacking?
Everything.
Oh, okay.
And that's the whole problem is everything is lacking. There's no motive. They can't really put the gun in David's hand. They can't really prove that David fired that weapon. There were bullets that were missing when they left that crime scene. There's extra DNA or unknown DNA. How quickly that they went and said that David was guilty. That was a big deal too. Instead of saying, you know what, we don't want to accuse anybody, we're going to hold off, we're going to wait until we can add some facts to this. No, they jumped the gun. In the 21 questions that we asked to Detective Jim Gummert, we asked him, when did you realize that this was a double murder suicide? And he says, by looking at the crime scene. You're going to tell me anyone who has looked at the crime scene photos, the crime scene video, who has looked at the crime scene documents, that anyone is walking through that house and says, oh yeah, this is clearly a double murder suicide, when they can't even identify the freaking bodies yet. They haven't done any of the work necessary. Everything was just way too staged. And they jumped the gun on so many different things when they did not need to. There was no reason to. There's no reason to rush with this. I mean, we're talking about a child that was brutally killed. Right. Killed. Not just shot in the back of the head or shot in the head, brutal. The crime scene was a brutal crime scene, and it is a mess. You have 3 different writings in 3 separate areas of this house, one that is in blood, and they're just going to say, yeah, he did all of this stuff. They jumped the gun way too fast, and that really was the first thing that kind of stood out to me. And we kept asking the same question. Okay, what do you have? Well, we can't talk about it until the case is closed. Then they close the case, and then they don't want to talk to us. So that was another thing too.
Right. Yeah. Very, very. Yeah. I hear what you're saying, and I like the fact that you do those little videos, like where you just ask these questions, and then you're just ask the question. Give me the evidence that proves that he did what they say that he did. And so far, you've said that nobody's been able to actually show you that evidence, which is very interesting. It's very simple, like you say. It's a 3-minute video.
Yeah.
And you're just asking these simple questions, and it gets really. When you start diving into this case, like I was saying, you just get all of these questions, and you just keep getting them, and they keep piling up, and then you got to kind of like wade through everything, because there's a lot of information that has finally come out. I know at the beginning it was kind of hard to get information that was going on in this case, and they were kind of not releasing stuff, and so it's been over these 8 years, because it has been almost like 8 years, which is incredible that all of you have been really diving into this case. And so and now I'd like to ask you, Catherine, what is some of the evidence that you're like, what is bothering you about this case? Like, what the evidence that you're looking at is leading you to believe that it didn't happen the way they say it did?
Oh, there's so much. There's so much. Well, what very first caught my attention were the autopsy reports. But then after that, looking at the photos, it's the complete lack of high velocity blood spatter within the home. There's none, 0 to be found. But recently, we've all read these reports over and over and over. I don't know how many times I've read the autopsy reports. Well, it wasn't until recently it dawned on me what David's autopsy report stated. And it was talking about the state and stage maybe of decomposition. And David's report states marked autolysis, and it emphasized the word marked. Now, in medical terms, that means that it's like advanced, it's noticeable. And so then when I saw that, finally saw that after all these years, it like a bell went off in my head finally. And then I'm like, okay, well, let me go look at Kamel's and Ranya's, and both of their reports just state autolysis. The same medical examiner did Kamel's, who did did Kamel and David. So when they wrote marked autolysis on David's, they knew when they wrote that David's decomp is more advanced than Kamel's. So the moment I saw that and I realized that, I'm like, wait a minute, he died first. This is according to what they've given us. The evidence and the autopsy reports tell you, I mean, this was huge, absolutely huge. And the fact that they have this, they know this, and yet they're still allowing everybody to say David killed his family, it's atrocious. I'm like, decomp only goes one way. There's no jumping around. But what they want you to believe is that David killed his wife and daughter, then kind of sat around for a bit, did whatever it is he did, did all this crazy stuff within the house, and then decided to kill himself. And then he's in the same environment, mind you. They're all in the same room, same temperature, same conditions. But yet he now manages to jump ahead in the decomposition process. This is what they want you to believe. Decomp doesn't work that way. What the decomp is telling you is that since he has marked autolysis, his was a little bit farther along. His decomposition was further down, not by much, but it was still enough that they wrote this in the reports. So if he died first, and if his decomp is further down the line, how did he kill his wife and daughter? How did he set that scene? How did he write on the wall? How did all of this stuff happen if he's already dead?
That's great points. And when people, I think if they look at the pictures, I've always came to the impression that they kind of threw everything at this I'm not sure what their reason was, confusion, to confuse people. I mean, it's really interesting because there's so much going on in these photos when you start looking at them. And that's where a lot of my questions started coming from. And then watching what you guys were talking about. And I'm glad that you said that there is a way that a body goes through decomposition. It's just a way. I mean, I'm sure that there's factors, temperature, and all of these things kind of play a variable. But as you were saying, there's definitely a way that things happen. And from what you've noticed is that, so you're saying that it can't happen the way it is because David's kind of further along than everyone else. So leading to anyone to believe that he was first.
Exactly. And in case people don't know, autolysis is simply the act of the body beginning to break down and quote unquote eat itself, where it's the decomposition, where it starts to decompose. And so it's, the natural process. Right. But when a medical examiner uses the words marked, they're telling you that it's very noticeable. And so I cannot emphasize enough how huge this is, and the fact that this is written in the reports, and the fact that not only, and then the ME, the same ME who wrote this up, puts on the reports that it was murder-suicide.
Right.
I'm like, you cannot have it both ways, young lady. You can't do it. You just stated that he has marked autolysis. The other two are only simply autolysis, which is the beginning, the very beginning stages of decomposition where the body's breaking down. Right. So how can you do that? How can you say that and then allow this man to be called a murderer?
Very true. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
Mark,
and go ahead. Yeah, Sophia, I want to get you to chime in. And guys, if you want to chime in anywhere, please do that. I mean, I'm just wanting to make sure I got everybody a chance to kind of give their thoughts on it. But go ahead, Sophia. What do you want to add in on this? Because, like I said, this is going to be tough to get all of this in 2 hours.
correct. Marked autolysis, the actual definition for that by researchgate.net says that it's a grade 3 autolysis. More than 75% of the internal granular cell nuclei showing autolystic changes and marked vascularization. I think that's how you pronounce that. So basically, it was very noticeable
Mm.
and versus the girls. And as Catherine has stated, it's not because somebody's body type or where they were laying in the room or anything that would cause this. It is the process of death.
Right.
So
It
he,
does make sense.
yeah, he definitely died first, and he
Yeah.
had been deceased much longer than those girls.
Interesting. Yeah, and I remember you, Catherine, too, talking about how you can tell, if you read the reports, that when they were doing the autopsies, they were actually able to take like slices. And I'm not a medical person, so I'm probably going to butcher the terminology, but from what I can understand, that you can't do that if decomposition is so far along, you kind of liquefy in the inside. But they were able to actually take samples and slices and look at things, which is strange if he's dead as long as they say he was.
Exactly. And, when you're reading the police reports, everybody's like, they were in advanced stage of decomp. They were advanced. It was advanced. No, advanced means, yes, liquefaction already has begun. There are no organs left and they start to bloat and everything is just, everything goes away. But they were able to go in, remove all these organs, take samples, and you take them and you put them on slides and you save them for later, able to look at these slides under a microscope. That's not advanced. They were all early to moderate. And again, that's another huge thing. They weren't laying there for 3 and 4 weeks. 3 and 4 weeks down the road, you're going to be getting to the point where the internal organs are liquid. You can't slice a liquid. It just doesn't work.
Right. That it says a lot, and that's what kind of I'm draws me to a lot of my questions, is that because like you were saying, there's a process that the bodies go through when you die, when you pass away, and there's a stages that go, and I want to get into that in the second hour, because I do know that you've interviewed a woman who is a coroner and knows these things, and that was really interesting, because now you're getting information from somebody who does this for a living and has done this. So it really clarifies a lot there. And that's what kind of really made sense to me, is that she kind of explained how things just happen. And it happens the same way every time. Yes, things vary, temperature, like I was saying earlier, but generally things go the same way. And then when certain things are missing, it's a big red flag if that process is interrupted.
Yep.
So,
And they were all in the same room, all in the same conditions.
Wow. Interesting. Yeah, and the evidence too. I want to get into that with all you guys, because that is, like, I want to ask you, Dan, because the evidence, I know that you guys ask a lot of questions. What are your, like, you've actually spoke with some of the police from Apple Valley and the detectives, and you've done a lot on this case. What are your thoughts on how they handled the case, like in the evidence gathering? I got a lot of questions about the evidence for sure, especially why they didn't test certain things. I just want to get your thoughts on that.
Well, I think overall it was very rushed, like Greg said. Things were brought to a completion and a conclusion very fast.
Mm.
The thing that got me was when they made a press release announcement to the city of Apple Valley saying the public is not in danger. David was the killer. In other words, they went over and above to not only say that David did this, but to remind the general public that there's no killers at large. The public is safe. And so once they said that, that was a thing for me that really, I know people there. I used to live there. You're telling me the public is safe? That's to cover. That's a CYA statement for the police to cover their ass. Did you want to say that to make sure that no one's in fear that the murderers and the killers are out there? Now, we know for a fact that they are. And so the police department and the Apple Valley Police Department can't backtrack that. They can't walk that back. They've already said that. The toothpaste is out of the tube. Now they can't go back and say, you know what, we'll reopen this. They've already cemented the fact that the citizens are not at large. Now, what if more or additional murders happened along the way, and it ties it back to the same killers? They backed themselves into the corner, painted themselves into the corner, and that's when I saw that things was really goofy that way. But once again, I was thinking that this was a government sanctioned hit, a deep state assassination. Because that's what goes along with something like that is the police are the first to be covered up, and they're going down a certain bullet point list. They're talking the same things. They're doing the same. Everyone's walking lockstep with the same narrative, and that's what I saw here. David did it. David is bad. David used drugs. David was anti-government. David had a lot of firearms. He was using hallucinogens. We heard the same thing. So the average person on the street, the general gullible public, thinks, oh, well, sounds good. He did it. Let's flip the channel to something else on the news. Obviously, he did it. Well, you look at it, and he didn't. And so that's when we started getting into some of the interviews. Now, Catherine was very good on the medical side. She was able to get coroners on the show for interviews, get some autopsy experts in there on the medical side. I don't have a medical background. That area doesn't interest me too much, and that's why we've got a panel like this to have people do their things. What I was mainly into was my background is accounting and business and finance, and so I looked into this $50,000 withdrawal. I looked into the banking. I looked into the monthly statements of the family, and I saw that they were not having any hardships. They were not financially strapped. I think David, over the course of 6 months, had a bad check or two. I think they bounced a check, perhaps. They were struggling to some extent, but they made their monthly bills. They paid their credit card. Their money was coming in as far as the income from her job and David's side jobs. They were doing just fine financially. They were a young, struggling financially, I would say, probably, but they were very prudent in their purchases. You can tell all the way along the line, looking at each of the statements, they were transferring money from one account into the next to pay the mortgage. Everything was normal. There was no alarm bells going off. The $50,000 withdrawal that was right there on the bank statement was something that jumped out to me. And that was not just the fact that it was a withdrawal, but it was at a branch location, and it was in the form of cash, which should have been setting off red lights for IRS filings and things like that, because anything over $10,000, you've got to create a statement, file it to make sure that everything's on the up and up, because that's how they combat money laundering and things like that. So that was never looked into. The detectives on the case should also be looking into those things. Never was anything even mentioned. Never was it mentioned to look into it that was a POS account, a payable, or a POD account, a payable on death. And it was in Dan Sr.'s name. And he admitted that he was out of the country in the month of October 2014. So who made the withdrawal? Well, we saw the slip. It's signed Daniel Crowley. It's probably the son. I'm guessing it's the son. It took place in a Minnesota-based bank, not in Germany. So we already have fraud that they never looked into. So those are the things that we looked into. The other thing, the big thing that I had was the contract dispute. Was there a contract or not with the Mikes? Michael Entertainment Group, or MEG, the two owners there was two guys by the name of Mike Biggio and Mike McDonald, I think, are the names. They were the two owners. Everyone said there was no contract. There's no $30 million deal. There was no deal. There was no contract. There was nothing. All of it fell apart. Well, what's the best way to get to the source is to contact the Mikes. Everyone's saying nothing happened. Even the father, David Crowley's own father, said there was no deal. He had to walk away from it. It all fell through. He was facing financial hardship. Well, that struck me as odd, because none of that seemed true. And the more I started looking at David Crowley's father, everything he said in text, his phone calls and texts and things were lies. They didn't make up. Nothing was supported by facts. So I reached out to Mike Biggio, the president of MEG. Did an interview with him on the record. Says, did you have a contract? Yes, we had a contract. Did you ever call and back out? No. Did you ever tell him you were he was fired? Did you cancel him? Did you say you're out? No. So I said, was it an active verbal contract that you were pushing along? Yes. So we had a contract. So now we're dealing with facts, and for shows like this, and the justice page that we have on Facebook is living in facts, things that we can prove, things that we can have on paper, like Catherine mentioned, with the marked, the keyword marked. That's a fact. It's not someone's opinion. That's a fact. He's more advanced decomp than the daughter and the wife. That's a fact. Well, people don't like it. They don't agree with it. But that's what it is. People say there was no contract, there was no money, there was no $30 million. Well, there was a deal. There was a contract. David did not have $30 million check sitting in his office somewhere waiting to cash. No, that was not the deal that he was going to get $30 million. The script was worth $30 million to move it forward into a web-based series, a Netflix series, an actual movie, an actual full-length feature film. And then that would be the budget that they would use to pay the actors, and all that would go out the window and out the door to pay to get all this put together. That's what we heard from the Gray State guys to discredit the contract. As they said, David didn't have $30 million. They never cut him a check for $30 million. We said, once again, we never said that. We never said he had the money. He had a contract. The contract value was $30 million. That's how much the studio wanted to produce it. So it's going on things like that, getting an interview, putting it online, and posting it with Michael Biggio, and saying, here you go, look at it. We're not car salesmen here running a justice page to try to get people to think what we think. We're just saying, here it is. You have questions about Mike Biggio, here's the answer. You have questions about the autopsy and the body's decomp, here's the answer. In fact, we'll bring in an autopsy, and we'll bring in a mortician. We'll bring in a coroner. We brought in all these people. Everything that we're talking about here tonight on the show, people have been on an episode, an interview, a show, Skype, YouTube, talking about these things.
Right.
So we've done all the homework. All the legwork's already been done. We already know essentially what happened. So we keep doing these shows and things like this to get, it's 8 years out. Sooner or later, someone's going to stumble, someone's going to crumble, someone's going to crack, someone's going to say something. That's what happens in a case like this. They can't keep their mouth shut for this long a time.
Right.
And now it's been 8 years. But yeah, our goal is always facts, not opinions, and things that you can prove. And so we have a file section on the Facebook page, and Greg's very good at uploading and putting PDF files out there. Sophia puts a lot of things out there. We've got a whole library of documentation that's legit that you can go back to and point to what they actually said. Not hearsay, it's not theories. This is not a conspiracy theory site. It's just facts. So that's all I've got.
Hey, yeah. Dan, as someone in finance, when you found out that they had a $14,000 check on their front door, did that stand out to you a little bit?
Yeah.
Yeah, that was around Christmas time at the end of the year, and the father sent a check for $14,000. I thought it was odd, but usually end of the year, if people are writing checks or giving gifts, as they call it, to family members, the limit at the time I think was $10,000 or $12,000. That's the max you could gift someone. We looked it up, and the year 2014 they had upped it to $14,000. So once we found out that was the major donation that you could give to someone without being taxed on it. So Dan Sr. wrote a check, I'm assuming to all three children, for $14,000 each to help his tax side of thing on his individual tax return, and also give the children money that they don't have to pay taxes on itself. It's called a gift, and you can do that. And so as the year came, I'm assuming, I'm not, this is my opinion, is that Dan Crowley Sr., with the money that he makes, and he's a fairly wealthy gentleman, meets with his CPA at the end of the year, and before the end, December 31st, what should I do? Hey, you've got, we've got some, you're gonna have some big taxes. Do you want to do some gifts? Do you want to write some gifts? Do you want to make a charitable contribution somewhere? And so he wrote out, I'm assuming, checks for $14,000 to all children. Then he's clear, the kids have the money. Now, the question is this. It was done in good faith, I'll say, but we don't have evidence that Dan Jr. received the check or Allison, the sister, received the check. And if Dan Sr., the father, which we're leaning towards, already potentially knew about the deaths, he stuck that in the mail to make him look like a good guy, because the officers would find that and say, "Whoa, what a loving dad. He gave his son a $14,000 check." He knew it would never be cashed. It never cleared the bank. It never cleared. No one ever cashed it.
Right.
So there's speculation out there that Dan Sr. cut the check knowing that he's got to put himself in a favorable light with detectives. What better way than to do a check to show what a loving, generous father he is, just in time for the year end to help his son-in-law, his son and his daughter-in-law and his family make some extra money. They weren't even on talking terms, I don't believe. Now, if you listen to his interviews and his so-called texts that he says to police, he was asking to come over and do this and do that, and let's go to Thanksgiving, let's go to the zoo, let's go to Christmas, let's go up north camping. All these fun things that we haven't had any support to tie any of those claims out. So I'm still open to the fact that he wrote that on purpose to cover his tracks to make it look like the good, generous father. But that's speculation on my point. But that is the maximum gift donation the IRS allows each year, each calendar year for a family member as a gift.
And it's
without
kind of
with any penalty.
And it's kind of strange that he didn't mail it. He left it, or his son, David's brother, left it in a paper bag.
That's weird.
Outside of,
Yeah.
of their house.
Okay, so here's how it went down. And because there's some confusion on this as well. David and Rania and Kamel did Christmas, by themselves and elsewhere. The week or two before, Dan Sr. had the other kids over, either all together for Christmas or one at a time. Allison and her girlfriend, I'm sure, did Christmas with them. And Dan Jr. did Christmas down in Owatonna. It's about 45 minutes south of the Apple Valley house. It's kind of a big house there that Dan Sr. lives in, and the wife did too before they got divorced. So they probably had a Christmas event there. Hey, Dan, while you're driving back up north to the Twin Cities, here's all the gifts. I don't want to mail out 5 or 6 gifts. Here's a bag, drop them off on the front steps, or drop them off, give them to David. There's probably a gift for Rania, a gift for Kamel, a gift for David. We know all this because that's what the gifts were. And he probably said, here's my assumption once again, instead of dropping this in the mail for 48 cents stamp, here, drop it in the bag and give it to him. I don't want to mail it. Just hand it over to him. So that's why it was found on the front steps. It had not been mailed, correct. I think I may have said that earlier, but it was in the bag, which means it was not mailed. So that's where the gifts were. Allison, the daughter, was living in, I think, Wisconsin, another state, all the way home. Now, Dan Jr. lives in Minneapolis, St. Paul area, which is on the way. He would have been driving 45 miles north to David's house and would have been right on the way to drop it off, and then would have gone home. So that would have been something that's very common in my family over the years. When I have something for my parents to drop off from my brothers, one of us is usually on the way. My mom will hand me a bag of things and say, here, drop these off next time you're driving past. That's and maybe that's a Minnesota thing. I don't know. But it's very common to drop off things. I don't want to mail it. I don't want to FedEx it. Next time you see him, drop it off. And so I think the assumption was, everything being in a perfect world, of course, is Dan, go to the house on the way there, drop them off, open them, sit around the living room together and open the gifts all at the same time, having a big fun thing. Well, what we know is that Dan Jr. did not drop him off on the way home. He went home. Then he sat and twiddled his thumbs a couple of days, didn't know what to do, and then drove down to deliver them. And then, I don't want to do this, so he turned around, went home. And this, is everyone familiar with this tale here?
Yes, I am.
Remember, he made an attempt to drop it off. And then he turned around, and another day he came back and sat down and says, you know what, I'll drop it off on this day. And he dropped him off. And then he says, I'm not going to knock on the door or ring the doorbell. I'm just going to leave it out front because I don't want to bother the family. I'll leave it on the front stoop. Well, that's very odd.
Yeah.
Because we know that they were already on bad terms. They weren't even talking to each other. So the fact that he didn't drop it off The first time is pretty noticeable. I would have mentioned that if I was a detective. I would have looked into that. Why didn't you drop it off? Now you're back down to Apple Valley. Another 15 miles out of your way to drop it off when you could have just done it the first time. And then he stops and reconsiders, and I don't want to do it. I don't feel comfortable, so I'll go back home a few days later. Then he changes his mind. Well, you know what? I am going to make the trip down there, 15 miles again, drop it off, but I don't want to confront anybody. He didn't use that word. He says, I didn't want to bother the family. So I just left him on the front stoop. So that's how the whole bag of gifts were set on the front stoops the whole time. Dan was acting very strange on this whole thing. We know from our investigation that they were not on talking terms. That's why he didn't want to confront. He did not want to have a confrontation. Last time we heard about David after some email that came on, I think, Homel's birthday that left David crying, she said, of the words that Dan Jr. said that were so hurtful to David. So they weren't even close to being on speaking terms. And so that's why I think that's why Dan wanted to make himself out to be the good guy too, to, hey, I'm going to drive over, drop off the gifts for the kids because I'm the great uncle here. I'm the great brother. No, they were on very bad, nasty terms. And this all ties into means, motive, and opportunity, which you need. You need all three for a crime. Can't have two, can't have one. And so back to Apple Valley Police, what's the motive for David to kill his family? Well, we don't know. We don't think there is one. You have to have a motive.
Yeah.
You can't check it off and say, I guess we'll skip it this time.
And the police couldn't find a motive
out the window.
Yeah, the police couldn't even find a motive.
All three things.
Yeah.
Before you can close a case. You have to have all three. That's Detective 101 class. None of us here are detectives, but we know that. They threw that out the window and says it must have been some hallucinogens he was on it. It must have been something. Well, it can't be must. It can't be must have. It can't be must have been. In a criminal case, you have to say, here's the evidence. Here's the motive. Here's the opportunity. Here's the means. Those three. Very, very simple. And James Gummert knows that. Chief Rice Geigel knows that. I mean, these guys know that you need three things. To go.
It's very interesting. It's very interesting that they never.
So that's
found a motive. They just can't. They can't.
And they came out and said we don't have a motive. We don't think there is one.
They don't have one. And then that's why I wanted to ask you about
PTSD.
Yeah, I was going to ask Sophia about that because I know you've looked at the journals, Sophia, and well, all of yous have actually, but I wanted to kind of let Sophia give her thoughts because you've definitely, and I've looked into the journals too, and a lot of people say that he was on this decline and that he was going crazy kind of and losing grip kind of over time. What are your thoughts? Because you've looked into these journals, and I just want to get actually anybody's thoughts on this one, what the journals reveal to you, Sophia.
The journals actually reveal a lot more than what I had expected.
Me too.
I was expecting the official narrative. I was expecting it to jive with that. And that's not what I got. Yes, it did show that in the summer, he was experimenting with mushrooms like once or twice. And then after that, he had stopped using them.
Mm-hmm.
It showed that he was smoking weed quite a bit in the summer, but it tapered off by the fall. And it had showed that he had drank beer and stuff like that. I think he was self-medicating a little bit, nerves, anxiety, but by the fall, that had all tapered off. And he even wrote in his journal he didn't like the effects that the mushrooms did. He didn't like the effects of beer. He didn't like the effects of weed,
right,
or too much weed. And so he was working through all of this. And to me, it showed somebody who was actually working on himself. He was trying to get through some things. The PTSD that people point out, is mainly from his stop loss in the military.
Mm-hmm.
And he discusses that and goes through it. He also discusses how He was unhappy with how his family was around him and his family. And, it's a very interesting document to go through. And it does prove that David was actually working on his scripts, and he had other projects that he was working on also, that he was active, he was doing things. And it doesn't back up the official narrative. And I think that's the main thing right there. This whole thing with the zoo, it's not even mentioned in the journal. David discusses so much of stuff for that day, but he never once mentions his dad or the zoo.
That's true. Yep. The journal was really interesting to me because it gives you, and what the problem with the journal is that you're looking at little clips, like little slides of somebody's life, so you can't you can only get so much information from it. And a lot of people say he said some horrible things about his daughter in his journal, and that is true. I mean, he said a few nasty things, but I mean, he would also, if you keep reading, he was actually really aware of that and working through that. He was just, putting his feelings down at the time, and probably, never expecting it to ever get out in public like it is now. These were very personal thoughts. So I like the way that you said that he was working through things. And that's what I saw in the journal, is that it was somebody that was really working through things, and near the, as it went on, he was definitely making progress.
Can I add also, for those people who were saying that he said horrible stuff about his daughter,
Mm-hmm.
it was like once or twice.
Right.
I don't think it was that bad.
Yeah, if anybody has ever been around a very active 4-year-old or 5-year-old, you're going to say and think some pretty horrible things.
I know my mom did.
Well, there were people that were telling us he was saying these terrible, terrible things. Then once I read them, like it wasn't as bad as people were trying to make it sound like.
Right.
And you could totally tell they were digging, they were fishing for anything, because they were desperate. They needed David Crowley to be guilty, and that was never going to happen. So all that they could do is go after him, make him seem like he was a bad father. He didn't care about his wife. He didn't care about his fans. He didn't care about anything. That's what they tried to tell everybody. And unfortunately, some people have fallen for it, but I don't believe that many people have. I still think that many people are like, look, I don't care what you say. This guy did not do this, and you guys have not shown us any evidence, any facts that he did it.
Right.
Period.
Oh, good point. Good point. Yeah, I should have said that. It wasn't through it was constant through the journal. He did just a couple passing comments, but I never really focused on that. I kind of I was more interested in how he was making his way through the journal and making progress. And so that's great that you talked about that.
There's many bad parents out there. There's many, horrible parents out there that don't shoot their 5-year-old child. They don't shoot their kid. So it's like they're really stretching it. They're just, like I said, they're very desperate.
Exactly right. Well, there we go, guys. First hour down. Please join me. We will be back in about 4 minutes. We are here with Greg Fernandez Jr., Dan Hennen, Sophia Allen, and Catherine Michelle. We are talking about the David Crowley case, a gray state.
Listen to Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com, and we'll be right back after this message.
You going back in? There's still men out there. God damn. When I go home, people ask me, hey, Hoot, why do you do it, man? Why? Some kind of war junkie? I won't say a goddamn word. Why? They won't understand. They won't understand why we do it. They won't understand. It's about the men next to you. And that's it. That's all it is.
Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, #1 listener-supported radio, the printing press for freedom at a time when freedom is needed the most.
I am Bill Johnson. Some consider my efforts to be an underground law school. I am not an attorney and I do not give legal advice. I teach. That's lawful and legal. Consider yourself served. You are to appear Wednesday nights, 10 p.m. Eastern, Studio A. My forte? Foreclosure and contract law. Grab your legal pad and pen. Learn a broad spectrum of law spanning administrative, criminal, family, tort, and federal law. Fools and losers cling to old cases. I dissect and comment on the latest rulings that control the courts. Don't be a loser. And if you don't appear, you will be held in contempt.
I will defend myself against their tyranny. Number 3 is my radio broadcast. I'm squarely in front of the public all the time, and they all know what's going on.
For we are opposed around the world by a monolithic and ruthless conspiracy that relies primarily on expanding its sphere of influence.
Hello, my name is John Wayne, and I do a broadcast here at freedomslips.com, revolution.radio, called The Unequivocal Truth, DEFCON 1.
Freedom and fear are at war.
And folks, I assure you, we are in Defense Mission 1, as we journey perilously through this paradigm that we currently reside in. And I ask that you join me every Saturday, 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time for The Unequivocal Truth, DEFCON 1.
We shall never surrender.
The original machine had a base plate of pre-famulated amulite surmounted by a malleable logarithmic casing in such a way that the 2 spurving bearings were in a direct line with a panometric fan. The lineup consisted simply of 6 hydrocoptic Marsal vanes, so fitted to the ambifacient lunar wane shaft that side fumbling was effectively prevented. The main winding was of the normal Lotus O deltoid type placed in panendermic semi-boloid slots of the stator, every 7th conductor being connected by a non-reversible Tremi pipe to the differential girdle spring on the up end of the gram meters.
Thank you for listening to Revolution Radio, taking the confusion out of transmutated lunar girdle springs for 4 years and running. Revolution Radio, the #1 listener-supported alternative media radio on the planet. All right, thanks for listening while we took that short break here at Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com. And now we're going to get back to your host.
Welcome back, everybody. That first hour, as usual, goes way too quick. We are in the second hour here. We are talking about David Crowley, who was a veteran, and was working on his project, the script called Gray State, and was in the process of trying to get a movie deal, and which was, then being talked about becoming a series on Netflix or another platform, and was actually then he was found deceased, his family, and they accused David of murdering his wife, his child, and then himself. And I have a panel of amazing guests on here this evening who've been looking into this evidence and this case for 8 years and really diving in and looking deep into the evidence and have a lot of questions. So like I said, welcome back to everybody on the panel. I mean, it's so much to cover, and there's so many moving pieces here that it's hard to cover it all. So I really hope at the end of this, I'll make sure Greg lets everyone know where they can find all the documents so you guys can start looking into this case. There's all of my guests have videos on YouTube and other platforms. If this is something that you want to look into, I want to make sure that people can find the information as quickly as possible, dive into it. So I want to go to you, Catherine, because we were kind of talking during the break, and I think we should go through the time of death differences. I mean, I think that's really important because that is really key to this case. And then maybe we can dive into the state of the crime scene and what you guys think is missing, because I think there's a lot of things missing and can't be explained. So, Catherine, go ahead and let's cover the time of death differences.
Yeah, and Dan's the one who brought this up, and he's right. We really should. We need to reiterate just how important this is, because
Right.
the narrative states that David killed his wife and daughter, and then depending on whose story you're going to follow, it was anywhere from a few hours to possibly the next day is when he, quote unquote, decided to kill himself.
Mm-hmm.
Now, but when we're looking at the autopsy reports, and the autopsy reports state that David had marked autolysis and Kamel and Rania had autolysis, big, huge difference there. And we're talking a time frame worth of difference. It could have been up to a day or so later, because his is just it's advanced, not hugely advanced, but it is advanced in past the point where Kamel and Rania were. Now, they were still all in early to moderate decomposition, so they were probably only there when I interviewed and talked to a medical examiner when he saw the photos. And in all fairness, I just had printed out a copy on photocopy paper. It was not an actual photograph, so it was really bad. But he read the reports, and then he also looked at the photo, and he said that his best guess that those bodies were there anywhere from 4 to 7 days, 10 days at most. So Dan and I were chatting back and forth. So he's like, okay, so probably Rania and Kamel right around the 4 to 7 days mark, and then David somewhere on the 9 to 10. And in my best guess estimate, yes, that's exactly how I would look at it. David was probably dead a day or two longer than the girls were. And I mean, that is so huge. I mean, the fact that it is written in the medical examiner, in the autopsy reports, I mean, I don't know what else it is that these police officers were looking for. And were they looking for an easy out, or were they doing what Dan was saying at the very beginning? Are they just trying to shove everything and close everything down and have a nice, neat, what they thought was a nice, neat little bow? But when you start looking at the crime scene, and it's his blood, David's blood and Rania's blood is missing from the entire crime scene.
Right.
So you have gunshot wounds to the head, but yet their blood and their brain matter, and not to be rude, crude, and offensive, but this is a fact. You don't have their blood or their brain matter anywhere in that house. Kamel was shot twice in the head that they have evidence of 2 entrance or exit wounds, but there are 3 bullets with her blood and DNA. And yet there's no high velocity, 0 high velocity blood spatter, 4 gunshot wounds to 3 heads, and no high velocity blood spatter.
That's big.
It's huge. It's beyond huge. So we have David's blood is missing, Rania's blood is missing, but yet their bodies are in the house. We have David, whose autopsy states that it is marked. And again, I'm stressing that because in the medical field, when you put that down, you were stressing a difference. She is showing a difference between the bodies. And it's like, you have all of this, and you don't have a bullet that killed David. And it's like, Rania, I think I first learned about it, I believe it was from Dan one time in one of his videos when he was doing videos at the beginning, where he was talking about Rania's arm is completely it was taken from the socket.
Yep.
That takes a lot of strength. That's not something a dog is going to be able to do with just 4 to 7 days worth of decomposition.
Right.
That everything is still really tight. Those ligaments and everything, they're a strong, fibrous. You can't just pop it out.
Mm-hmm.
And then to have a fractured rib as well.
I was going to ask that. Yep.
So yeah, she has a
Nobody can
fractured,
explain that one. No one can explain that one.
and they didn't even attempt it. And that, to me, I find shocking from the medical examiners. You have 3 medical examiners and or pathologists who were looking at Ranya's. All 3 of them signed her autopsy report, and not one of them questioned that.
Now, Catherine, 1.2 is a private investigator that was hired, Kenneth May. He did specifically say, you know, that was a head scratcher for me. I didn't get that whole arm missing with the rib, and that's when I kind of pushed him to take it to the next level. Well, what's the next steps as an investigator that you do? Well, I just thought it was strange. I mean, that's you can't have that. It's not an acceptable answer. Now, the police detectives as well, that's not acceptable. The arm is missing, the broken rib. What happened? Oh, well, we don't know. We just thought it was strange, or the dog did it all. Well, that's not you doing your job. Those are huge things. Now, what you said earlier with the day's comp, what I want to get at for the general public is that the crime scene is multiple days. These are different murders on different days, and we don't even know where the secondary crime scene is. It's not the living room.
Correct.
It's not the main crime scene. It's a scene. But Kenneth Maines also did not know the difference between medium blood spatter, medium velocity, and high velocity. I made sure he understood it. A gunshot, a 40 caliber Springfield handgun, is a gunshot. That's high velocity, not medium, not even close to medium. Completely different. You're going to have spray on the ceilings, on both sides of the wall, the floor, everywhere. Beating someone, torture, that's medium velocity. That's what I tried to get him to understand. Everyone in that room, all the blood there, not everyone in the room, but technically the blood that was there was medium, meaning someone was beaten, someone was tortured, right?
Correct.
Not a gun, not velocity. So where were they shot? Where were they killed? We know something happened in the living room on 1051 Ramsdale Drive, because there was random blood there. Nothing that you would see in a triple homicide. You'd have massive blood, brain matter. You're talking everything. So where were these people killed, and when? Was it in the house? Was it in the basement? Was people coming out and in? Is I think we've been asking the whole time for 8 years. The rear slider left ajar. Were the killers coming and re-entering into that house? I don't know. I don't think they would have gone through the back door. I think they would have come in and out of the garage without anyone even knowing it. I can't believe neighbors would have seen other cars in the driveway. So if they had David in his car and had access to his car and had the family, held hostage, so to say, we don't think there was multiple activity from killers coming in and out of that house.
Right.
But they were either there multiple days or there on multiple instances on separate days. We already know David didn't do this. So when did the killers come and go? When did they drag the bodies? When did they bring the bodies in? Where were they killed is questions that we've been asking for 8 years. They weren't killed in the living room. That's where the bodies resulted. That's where they were found laying. And there was a bunch of blood there. And they were killed on different dates. These are not hours away. These are days before David was killed laying there. Maybe he was in the basement for all this time. And before they left, dropped him off upstairs, and then they took off.
Yeah.
That's the questions that we're asking.
Yep. And possibly in a different location. And like you stated, the back door was ajar. And when you're reading the reports and when they're interviewing neighbors and stuff, people did see the back door in different stages of being open and or closed. So we don't know. Is that the method by which they were coming in and out? We don't know. And like you stated, the living room only has medium velocity and low and or passive blood drops.
Yeah.
That's it. There is zero. Now, when I interviewed Sarah, she works in the mortuary field and has her entire life. So she is very well aware. She goes to death scenes. She picks up bodies. They embalm people. She's fully aware of how a body reacts and what it looks like. And she actually shared with me, a photo of someone else that she was in a patient, or I don't know what you want to call it, client, a person that she had to go and pick up. And this person suffered a gunshot wound to their head with a 40 cal with a very similar gun to what David had. And the damage that that bullet did there, I mean, and this was her thing too. I mean, everybody who knows anything about blood spatter, right away, you're like, where's the high velocity? Where's the brain matter? Where are the bone fragments, the small bone fragments that should be everywhere? And she's saying the same thing. She goes, here's what this looks like. She goes, I don't see this at the crime scene. And I go, no, you don't. It's nowhere. But yet we have passive blood drops in the kitchen, which generally means that that comes from the perpetrator. Not, you know, maybe not 100% of the time, but it generally will mean that the person probably injured themselves. So those passive drops, as they're leading like toward the sink, you have it on the floor, on the dishwasher because it was left open, and then the sink is not too far from there. But yet none of this, not one of these instances caught the attention of the police officers.
That's so true. And that's the thing too, Catherine, and that really gets me is the stuff that wasn't tested even. Like, I mean, we've talked about, I hope people do look into the photos and that, because then they'll kind of get in a picture of what we're talking about. But the big blood stain on the recliner, that, you know, it's a fair amount of blood. Yep. That was never tested. And there was a lot of things that's just always bothered me about the case. And there's a few things that you guys know bother me about the case. The things that were not tested and the bullet found in, which I want you guys to comment on, and any of you can join in. Sophia, Greg, please feel free to join in as well, because that bullet that was found in the attic a month later, I mean, that is, and then nobody noticed the bullet hole in the ceiling at first. That's always bothered me. And then also the missing body parts, the hands that were missing, and then the heads were, you know, were eaten, which they blame the dog Paleo, which he gets blamed for everything. And another thing that's always bothered me too about the case is that if Paleo was there, as long as they said he was around these bodies, my brain tells me that there would be feet print of this dog everywhere through the house. If he's walking and he's feeding on these bodies, that's what they're saying a lot of this damage was from. You would think that there'd be blood all over the couch from his paws. It'd be all over the floor. It'd be everywhere. I know when my cat gets out and he steps in the mud, he runs through my house. I got cat feet print everywhere. And there's none. I don't see any dog prints anywhere unless I'm missing something. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't see any.
No, not at all. And another thing, you know, when they first walk in and they're describing how Kamel is lying on the floor, she's face down. Her left arm is under her body. Her right arm is above her head, but her head is covered by a blanket. Mm-hmm. So they didn't even know that she was missing her head and her hands just when they first walked in. Now, it was clear that Rania was missing her arm, and it was clear that David was missing a hand and most of his face. Yep. But with Kamel, she's covered. She's face down and covered. And yet they want us to believe that the dog got under her body, ate her hand, got under the blanket and ate her face and her other hand, but then nothing else. Now, all of these parts of the bodies that are missing, hands and face, these are all identifiers. Anything that could identify these bodies has been taken away. And briefly, now we all know that item number 57, the bullet in the ceiling, does not have David's blood, hair, brain. It has nothing. In fact, they were only able to find a small, minute amount of DNA. And I would really like Sophia to expand on that, because she did a lot of research in understanding how they do this testing, because this is also very important. That
is important. And just before you go on, Sophia, I just want to let people know, and I've said this, I know a friend of mine he's a gunsmith. This is what he does. He works with bullets. He works with guns, owns tons of them. And I asked him about this bullet in the attic. And I said, this was the one that apparently this is the kill shot that killed David. This is the main bullet that they found in the attic a month later with no hair on it, no blood, no brain tissue, nothing. And he said, impossible. It not with that type of ammo. No, he's just like, and then he was also commenting on the blood, like, where's this blood splatter? He was like, there's nothing there. So I just wanted to bring that up, that, you know, I do have a friend that's a gunsmith, and he was shocked that he's like, it's impossible that the bullet would be that clean if it went
Yes.
through somebody's skull. And
And they were
that's
hollow points.
hollow
That's what
points.
people
Yeah.
need to know. Hollow points. And those would fold back. They mushroom and they fold back and they grab whatever.
That's what they're designed to do.
Yes, exactly. And every other bullet, the three that they have with Kamel, all three of those have hair wound in them. You see tissue. You see all that. But on the bullet that has Ranya's DNA and so-called David's DNA, they are clean as a whistle.
Impossible. Yeah.
But yeah, Sophia, please explain
Go ahead,
how
Sophia.
that works.
Well, first of all, I'd like to also point out the area on the living room floor, which has an area rug in that corner where she's laying. It's extremely clean. So even if the dog had been eating her hand and her head and stuff like that, there would have been seepage from her body, but there's nothing there. You would have never known a body was right there, especially the head. So that's another red flag. And for that carpet, there's hardly any blood on that carpet. It's all on the wood floor, surrounding the carpet, on the walls, and on that recliner. But there is hardly anything on that carpet.
Yeah.
Can I jump in here real quick before you explain something? And I, for those who are just listening, what's important here is when Sophia and I were going through and we were measuring these blood drops and we were checking everything in, and then Sophia's like, she goes, look at this one particular photo and, take a good look at this and tell me, what I need to do. We were going back and forth. And so she's like, zoom in, because she was having me double check. So I'm zooming in and I'm looking, and what caught my eye on this particular photo is the blood drops. There are a few blood drops underneath where the rug begins to hang over, where the fibers of the rug are kind of hanging over. It's almost, think of like a short shag, and those little fibers of rug that stand up, the blood drops were under that. You don't have that in a crime scene.
Wow. Yeah.
Yes. And so when you start looking at everything real closely, it all begins to completely unravel, the blood underneath the rug. Now, again, I'm sorry to interrupt, but Sophia, what she found is amazing.
Go ahead, Sophia. I want to tell us about the testing they did on this bullet, because this is important.
They did a PCR STR test, which is short tandem repeat test. And basically what they do is they take that little teeny piece of DNA that they found on that bullet, which could have been saliva, it could have been tears, it could have been a skin cell, whatever it was super teeny. And they replicated it over and over and over to get a profile of that DNA. And that profile ended up matching David's. But the fact that they had to replicate it so much proves that it's not blood. That it had to have been something else, like skin or saliva or something. Who knows? The DNA test won't tell you that. But that's what they did. And they also did that for Ranya's bullet too. They had to do the PCR STR test. And that was replicating it over and over and over thousands of times just to get enough of a profile to match the DNA. So, I mean, it's crazy.
Yeah, and the bullet that was associated with Rania was the one that when they were rolling up that living room rug, it rolled out and then hit the wood floor. Now it's clean. You can't see any blood. You can't see any hair. But like Sophia was explaining, when they swabbed it and they ran the test, that's how they were able to find the DNA. Now, a good attorney, I would even think a mediocre attorney would be able to go, that DNA came from, it must have rolled where Ranya's body was lying on the floor. That's about how minute it was. Imagine a spent cartridge a spent bullet, I'm sorry, rolling, coming across and coming into contact and then picking up DNA as it's rolling out. That's about what it was. Not saying 100% because we weren't there, but there's a scenario that would be easily argued.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I get Greg. I haven't heard from you in a few minutes here, and I want to get your thoughts. Like they were very quick to rule this case, as we've been discussing even in the first hour, very quickly that this was a murder suicide. And how are they doing this when they didn't even have how many bullets did they walk out of that house with? That within the first 24 hours. I mean, if they're finding bullets days later, they're finding one in the attic a month later. This isn't adding up.
Yeah, they're left with four spent rounds and one unspent round, which doesn't get enough credit either. There was there was a round that was found in the same carpet. So I mean, in the same carpet, how do you have a bullet fragment or a bullet, a spent round that rolls out 2 days later? What type of a scenario would you need that, this just they happen to find it once they start rolling a carpet up? If you've ever rolled a carpet up, it's not a easy scenario to really think about, but so that's, that was one of the big major things that kind of stuck out to me on that.
For sure. The fact that they ruled it that quickly, or were definitely leaning in that direction very heavily, and they didn't even have all the evidence. Like they didn't have all the bullets, or they walked out of there and they were very confident, it sounds like, in their claims. And
yeah, it sounded like they thought everybody was shot once. That was it. So you got three shots. Okay, so we found 4 bullets. And we're basically done, right?
Yep.
And they find 3 that does have blood on it. So they probably figure, okay, well, these 3 that are in the living room, those must be for David Kamel and for Rania. But that's not their job. Their job is not to just say, well, this is what we think happened. Okay, we're gonna go on. The other problem is that when you have 2 other crime scenes here, so then you have the crime scene on January 19th, and you have the crime scene on February 18th here. Mm-hmm. And then they don't do any kind of backtracking. It's very, very subtle. Okay, well, now we have item 53, which is the bullet that rolled out of the carpet. Okay, well, now we have item 57, which is the bullet they found 1 month later that doesn't have any blood on it. So they have all of these problems here when they had to have left that house with 6 casings. So how do they feel comfortable leaving the house, unless I'm getting this wrong, how do they feel comfortable leaving the house with 6 casings, 4 bullets, and that's cool? They got the case solved, right? Yeah. And that was one of the big things that stuck out to me. When this first, that doesn't include anything we found out later on. I mean, I got that's a whole list. I got 10 things here that really, really show, okay, for anyone that has any questions that says, well, maybe David is guilty. Well, I mean, there's some very simple things, some very simple facts that show that there's no way that he is guilty. They've never proved him guilty, and they never will be able to, period.
Yeah, it's crazy when you, like I was saying, when you start digging into this case, I have more questions now, and I am very open to maybe he did this. I mean, I think all of you would say that if they can prove it and they can show you the evidence that David did this, I don't think anyone on this panel would just say would not say, okay, he did it.
I used to think that way, but not anymore. Yeah. Not after reading the autopsy reports.
Really?
It's dead solid. It's when it says marked autolysis, he was dead longer. And that's just how it is. And that is a fact. So after I saw that, and I know because I used to say what you're saying, but not anymore.
Interesting. Yep. That written down in that the word marked, is that important? That's a big thing.
It's huge. In the medical field, when you write reports, you write very deliberately. It is not just an accidental word or something thrown in. That was written deliberately to express the extent of his decomposition. So they're letting you know he has marked or advanced or extremely noticeable autolysis. But when it comes to the other 2, they only simply state autolysis. And that is huge. I can't tell you how big.
Wow, enough to make you stay that you're certain now.
I'm convinced now. There's nothing that can convince me otherwise. I mean, unless, the MEs could come out and prove that they lied on their autopsy reports. Oops, sorry, we lied. We didn't mean, it's too late. That was the nail in the coffin for me.
Oh, that's big. That's big. And who wants to tackle another part of the evidence that drove me crazy too, and my friend who works with guns for a living, is that when I explained to him that there was blood on the clip of David's gun, and that you can't explain that. I mean, and
David's blood. David's blood.
David's blood.
It's missing everywhere, but his blood is on the magazine loaded inside of a gun. That doesn't happen. It's impossible because they state that there were no injuries that happened to his body prior to his death. Well, then explain to us how his blood got on the magazine loaded inside the gun. Like Dan just stated, for me, that was like the perfect wording. Sorry, Dan, I don't know if you want to say this now, but that makes it a slam dunk. The word marked autolysis is a complete slam dunk. Nothing can change my mind anymore.
Wow. Yeah, and then along with all the other evidence that we're talking about, or lack of evidence, even it's really a strange, and it's so hard to get into in just one show. I'm glad that Greg brought that up, because you guys have been doing information and bringing out information for 8 years on this, and so that's how much has went into this. So to try to get everybody up to speed, I'm trying to do my best to inform people about this case, because I really hope more people look into it. And on your guys' Facebook page, you have almost 4,000 people that believe David did not do this and are looking into it. So that says something. And what bothers me is the stuff they didn't test. I don't understand why there's two things. Another thing too is when I saw, Catherine, the video that you did that showed David's clothing, that really was a game changer for me. The way the blood was on his clothing, if they say he did what he did and he took his life, I can't see how the blood would end up in the pattern all down his front and then into his boxer shorts, where it's soaked through layers and layers of clothing all down the front of him. It doesn't make sense.
No, it doesn't. In the pattern of blood flow just reminded me of accident victims that we came across that had head injuries, that are sitting down or squatting, and it's the same type of pattern it soaks straight down and goes down into their pants and then on their underclothes. That is what it was, not somebody who shoots themselves and then they supposedly fall straight back. Everything would have gone to the back. There wouldn't have been anything on his shorts. Now, I know we're going to be running out of time here, and I'm sorry. When I get excited, I talk a mile a minute. So sorry. But since Sophia's been kind of quiet, is it okay if she talks about the DNA and
Absolutely.
the unknown blood?
Absolutely. Go ahead, Sophia.
We do have unknown DNA that was found on at least 2 items. I'm trying to remember offhand again. One was, I believe, Ronnie's bullet.
Yes.
And then the other was, oh, goodness sakes, I can't.
You keep talking. I'll look it up on the chart.
I'm trying to remember too, because I do know there was 2.
Yes, and it was never ruled out who it was. They say it's unknown DNA, and then they rule out 2 of the 3 people in that house. So if it's Ronnie, and then they found 2 other possible profiles, 2 to 3 is what the wording says. But then they rule out David and Kamel, then who else who else's DNA is on that bullet?
Mm-hmm.
And then you also have David's cell phone. His DNA is not found on his cell phone. It's his.
Yeah. Should be all over the phone.
Correct. And there's blood on the phone. Kamel's blood is on the phone. And while we're on the topic of Kamel, I want to reiterate this as plainly as possible. We're not saying that Kamel did this. She has at least 3 bullets connected to her and 2 from the back of the head. There's no way she could have killed herself that way. So Kamel is innocent of this. And then we have Ronnie, who is 5 years old. There's no way she could have staged this whole thing. So
That's key, though, that there's this DNA that they never figured out whose it is.
correct.
Like, that to me, that's important. Along with so many other things they didn't test. I don't understand why they didn't test that big stain on the recliner.
Mhm.
I'm like, why did they not test that? Why didn't they test some of these passive blood drops? To me, that would say so much. And I've heard you mention that, Sophia, that if they would have tested a few of these blood drops, it would have answered a lot of things. Either way.
Yeah, absolutely. And as for the blood that's on the ground and on the walls, everything came back to Kamel. It's like,
Gee.
where's David's DNA? Where's Ranya's DNA?
Yeah, and
Everything came out.
I pulled up the chart that I did, and on the notepad from the office, which is item 41-2, notepad from office, mixture of 2 or more individuals. It includes Kamel, excludes David and Rania. Item number 53, which is the bullet that they supposedly tied to Rania, mixture of 2 or more individuals, matches Rania, excludes David and Kamel. So we have mixtures of DNA and blood, whatever it is, at this crime scene, and you have them excluding the other 2 people involved. Who's the third person? Who's the fourth person?
Mhm.
Wow.
And then
Go
when
ahead.
they give percentages for the DNA, they rule out unrelated individuals, but they don't rule out related individuals.
Correct.
So,
Interesting. Yeah, and I'm just thinking about what Catherine said about how things are worded, and the words matter.
mhm.
They do.
You know, and they're saying that it's unrelated, you know, or related. I mean, that means something. So I mean, they didn't. Wow.
And Dan also brought up the DNA and the blood found on the knife. Now, when you're looking at the reports, it states that it's a mixture of 2 or more individuals. There is nobody included, nobody excluded, but it cannot be matched to David, Kamel, or Rania. Explain that. The knife is at the scene, close
Yeah,
to
why
the
is it even
bodies.
there?
Yes.
Why is it there? That's why I keep going back
And
to.
they never question it. I mean, so there are so many red flags in this case.
Absolutely. And I want to get back to you, Dan, because I think we should talk about that. There was writing on, like, I was saying at the beginning, there's so much involved in this case. And when you're looking at this crime scene, what I found weird was how if you want to talk about the writing that was found on the wall, and they didn't even talk about that for the longest time. It was kind of, nobody knew about it. So can you explain that, like what was written on the wall, who they think did it, or what they're saying?
The writing on the wall was one of 3 things that related to the Muslim angle in this case. It said Allahu Akbar on the wall, written in blood. And then there was a submit to Allah now written on a notepad. And then the Quran was laying open on the floor in the living room. Those 3 things, after police talked to the families, both families, the Alam family is, and correct me if I'm wrong, anyone on the call here, is they said, let's suppress that whole thing because we don't want hatred jumping around here in the news as far as this some kind of a Muslim Islamic killing. Let's suppress that. And the police agreed to it. Now that's what I think what happened. So they kept those 3 things hidden from the public, and then they released their final results of everything. None of us even knew about those 3 things. We just thought it was a triple homicide killing. And then they were going to release it a year later with the case complete and closed. Tom Lydon from Fox 9 News here in the Twin Cities did a segment, I think the day before the announcement or maybe the day of the announcement, and he led with all that information, with those photos. And the police, the detectives say that got to him by mistake. He wasn't supposed to see those either, but he got the wrong version or the wrong contents of the file folder of the images. He wasn't supposed to get that, and he published it anyway for the dramatic effect on the news. Now, this is what James Gummert said, that he got the wrong file. We gave him, administratively, gave him something that he wasn't supposed to get. And then he made it public, and then the police department and the family had to kind of walk back and backtrack that, because they said, yes, we did know that all along, but we were supposed to keep it quiet. And then it kind of blew up. So that's what I heard about that. Now, you mentioned the blood on the wall. It was written in uppercase, so not cursive, block letters. It was identified to be Comel's blood. They did the test of that, but they also tested and they found that there was no fingerprints, no prints on the wall as far as identifying who did the writing. And so there's two schools of thought there. One is, when you're writing it so fast, you're not going to be able to pick up fingerprints. And some say maybe if you use a latex glove or something and did it, it's not going to leave any marks. Well, the fact of the matter was there was no finger marks, no fingerprints, no latent prints to be able to pick up on that wall at all. So the question is, who wrote it? And if they wore gloves, why? If David did it,
right,
and he wore gloves, why would be the need to use gloves to hide it? And so the other thing was, how did they get much blood up there to get up and stand on the couch to write the letters? Was the blood in some bowl or a container or something that they did with the hands? Because it was a ways up there. You'd be going up and down if you're dipping into her body or pool of blood or something to get it. So it must have been in something to be able to write it.
And there was no pool of blood in the entire house.
And there's no pool of blood in the house. We don't know where they got the inventory of blood to be able to conduct the writing by standing on a sofa cushion to get way to the top of a 8-foot ceiling wall, I believe it was. So it was written in all block letters. They also don't do, like Kenneth Maines mentioned too on his report, is they don't do letter or handwriting analysis to see who would have written that. People's handwriting using a pen or a pencil is completely different if they're writing something on a wall or with, something different like painting. Mm-hmm. So you can't look at that. You can't study it. Well, we did the analysis of who would write in uppercase letters, and when we saw all the gifts that were from the Crowley family to Rania and David and Comel, the only one who writes like that, even some other documentation, was the brother, Dan Crowley's brother, David Crowley's brother, Dan Jr. writes, all he ever writes is uppercase. He doesn't use cursive. And so we thought maybe that would be the case. Now people said, oh, they poo-pooed that. How could he do it? He's the brother. Are you saying the brother killed the family? I said, well, I'm not saying it didn't happen, but he's the only one who writes in all uppercase. And it does appear to be written by a person who's left-handed, or a person who's left and right, or two people writing it, a left and a right-handed person. But some of those letters, from looking at it, looks to be like a left-handed person writes. I'm left-handed myself. I went through all the letters and confirmed that that would be how I would make letters in block lettering. Now, David Crowley was right-handed. Most of the people in the group are right. The only person left-handed in the group is David's brother Dan Jr. So it fits, at least. He writes like that. He's left-handed, and so on and so forth. So that could be, but they didn't do a test of anything like that. They didn't look. They didn't even think it was strange that there was no fingerprints. And I went back to even James Gummert on some of the conversations by saying the entry point of making a letter, you'd have a print. Potentially. We all know that when you're sliding down on an uppercase, lowercase, you're not going to have any prints. But maybe at the end of the letter, when you lift off, might be a prints. You're telling me there's none? He said there's no prints anywhere on those letters. Well, I'm guessing it's from a latex glove. Well, he goes right away to say, well, we looked in the trash. We didn't see any latex gloves in the trash. Well, come on, Jim Gummert. You think you'd put them in the trash? So this is where, go ahead, Catherine. This is where it gets just so ludicrous.
I know. I'm sitting there going, wait. Those who can't see it, there's some who can see. I'm like, wait. You brought up a good point. They look in the trash, but in the trash is a piece of paper from a box of hair dye that holds the gloves so you can put them on your hand and do hair dye. Now the box wasn't in there. The hair dye wasn't in there. The only thing in there was the paper that holds the gloves that weren't there either.
Yeah, that's
so
weird
who got
too.
Their hair dye.
Yeah, exactly. And then let's add some more
and
fuel
where
to
are
this.
the gloves that accompany that package?
Exactly.
So that's the kind of things, Rick, that we're looking into, because it's so mind blowing.
Yep.
That
it's endless when you start really diving into it, and that's why I really hope people will look into this themselves and start looking through the documents and going over the evidence, because then you're going to quickly see, once you start doing it yourself, is when the questions, I think, of anybody, if they're being honest, look at it, will have these questions. And then let's bring in something else. Whoever wants to tackle this one. This was another one that was big for me, was the fact of where the gun was found next to David, which to me is impossible where this gun was found. Whoever wants to tackle this one to explain to people that, the whole gun thing and where it was found.
Sophia?
I'm going to let you handle this one.
What?
I'm going to let you handle it.
Oh, no. She does really good with this. Okay. Now, when you're reading the reports, you see some officers going, the gun is on, the right-hand side and all this other stuff, but it wasn't. And that's because they're facing him, their right hand. So they're assuming it's on. It's found on David's left-hand side. Now, mind you, imagine this 5'9" tall young man, arms stretched out. The gun is anywhere, depending on which report you read, a couple of inches to a foot away from the left hand.
Mm-hmm.
So David supposedly shot himself on the lower right side behind his right ear, shoots himself there. Okay, mind you, he's a military guy, so he's going to go back behind the ear. So he's going to shoot himself there. And the gun, instead of dropping straight down or remaining in his hand, it makes it almost like 2.5, 3 feet away across his body on the floor, facing the wrong direction. It's facing, is it facing up, Sophia?
Yeah, the muzzle is pointing towards the recliner.
Yeah.
Towards, David's head is in that position too, but it is pointing towards the recliner.
Wow.
So,
Yeah, and people that see that actual visual, it really raises a lot of questions.
Yeah, and the fact that his right hand is missing was another one. I was like, when you start diving into it, I'm just like, what is going on here? It's really crazy when you start really breaking through, you got to dig into the evidence and then you're going to see what we're talking about. It doesn't make sense.
He also shot with both hands. All the photos that I've ever seen, he's got his right hand on the trigger and around the handle of the gun, and his left hand is bracing his right hand. So if he would have died shooting himself like that, that gun should have been in his right hand or on his right side.
But they're saying that he shot himself in the back, or sorry, let me use my right hand, right? So it's like this, and then the gun flies magically over here and then lands next to his left side. That's what we're supposed to believe?
Paleo took it over there and dropped it perfectly right
but
there.
But they don't have Paleo's DNA. We never found his DNA on the gun, as far as we know.
Yeah, he gets blamed for everything.
Well, they never swabbed him. They never did a dog feces test. They never examined any of the feces or anything like that. So how could they prove that the dog did any of these things? But it's the same thing. They give, they're not even proving how David did these things. So why not speculate on all of these other things that they haven't even tested with?
That's a good point, Ray, that you brought up the word speculate, because I remember you, Catherine, talking about this in one of your videos, that it's kind of smart what the police did, because they kind of leave it really open. And I'm sure you can word it the way you did in the video, and I hope you know what I'm talking about. But you were saying, like, they kind of leave it open where people can actually do the speculating. They don't really say much.
Right.
Which is,
do they want us speculating on this? I mean, because I know with Dan Hennen
keeps everybody arguing.
They had kept saying, well, we want to create all this so that there is no speculation. But everything that they have done since day one seems to have been to create more speculation. Whether they did that on purpose or they didn't, we could talk about that at a later time.
Yeah,
Well,
no, that's
nowhere in the
yeah.
reports do you see where they say item 57 was the bullet that killed David. Item 53 was the one that killed Rania. Nowhere will you see it anywhere. Yet, what everyone else has done is filled in the blanks for them. So it's actually quite genius if you think about it. And so, I mean, I'm guilty of it too. I, right away going, well, 57, the one that killed David because it has his DNA. No, it's not. Yes, it has his DNA, but there is nothing that proves that those items were the two items. 53, there's no proof that it killed Rania. 57, well, we know it didn't kill David. But yet, look at the arguments. Look how many times that discussion has been made, and we jump to the conclusion. It's just natural. We're going to jump to it. It has the DNA, so then it must be his. No, that's.
Well, I think, yeah, I think good people want to give them the benefit of the doubt and say, okay, this is what you say. Okay, we're going to go with that. We're still going to question it, but we're going to start there. And that's been the biggest thing. It's like the more documents, the more stuff that we find that comes out that is public data, the more that it shows David did not do this. Now, we were told that the more evidence, all of this stuff that we have not seen, I was told by a guy named Sean Wright and a couple other people, well, you guys haven't seen what proves David did this. And the all of the documents that they were talking about, once we got those documents, it actually showed more reasons why we were right. It showed the complete opposite. Now I understand why they did not want to show us that. But these are people that have lied to us from day one. These are not honest people. These are people, for whatever reason, are hiding things, are lying, openly lying about things. Now, whether they were told, false things, then that's something they have to really look at. And they need to go back and re-examine whatever their thoughts were. But the fact is, all of the people that contacted Dan Hennen, contacted Catherine, contacted me, probably Sophia, you too, and probably many other people that are going to listen to this and actually watch this, the people that contacted us saying, you guys got it wrong, you need to stop talking about this, we know what the evidence was, we were David's closest friends, we were like blood brothers, et cetera, I was his actual Rolodex. All of those people, everything that they came back and told us, it all turned out to be wrong. Everything that they said, well, if you haven't seen these photos, you haven't seen these actual documents. And when we got those documents, we got those photos, we got all of that stuff. And all it did was show us why we are right and they are wrong.
And why lie? If this is a simple murder or double murder suicide, why lie?
Good question. Good. I just think that if it was the evidence would be so clear if it happened the way they say it did, there wouldn't be all of this. There just wouldn't. There just wouldn't be. There's so many, and as I was saying earlier, I hear from people all the time. You just look at the evidence, and then you're gonna understand that this is what happened. And I'm like, I'm sorry, I got more questions now than I ever had. By looking at the evidence and looking at these photos, there's things that just don't make sense in this case. Very, very, very interesting. And I really thank you guys for you made 8 years is a long time to look into this case and to really, you guys have really went over everything. I mean, and you still are. You're still trying to find anything that is going to help to get this case opened and looked at again. Like, what is the status on that? Or can you say, or is anything moving forward with this, guys?
Well, I think everything is always moving forward. Just as long as we help to keep this case going forward, because there are so many cases that drop down the memory hole, and then all of a sudden, well, they moved on to this other case. Nothing wrong with moving on to other cases, right? You don't just want to get stuck on just one case,
right? But
at the same time, there's so many different things with this case that this just seems like, this is. They always want to bury these cases. And what we're doing here is uncovering. This is buried truth stuff here, right? They try to bury this truth about all of these different things. And just like many other cases too that never get credit, there's probably many people out there covering other cases and are like, man, I wish I could get some type of traction for the case that I really think is true. Keep making videos, keep doing things. You can do something to keep this case going. Do not give up and do not stop, even if your videos never get any views, even if nobody sees it, nobody watches it. If you believe that it is true, do not let anybody stop you. Stay on top of it. At some point, the truth will come out.
Absolutely. Great. And I'm looking
Sorry,
at the
Sophia.
time.
I'm sorry, Sophia.
Yeah, go ahead, Sophia. I'm looking at the time and it's flew by again, but is there anything you want to add in, Sophia?
Yes. One of the things that the city attorney said was that we needed to hire an attorney. And so I have picked a couple of them, attorneys in Minnesota, and I have sent out emails to them, and I'm just waiting for a response. This is
Wow.
just recent, so I'm not expecting anything like back the next day. But yeah, I'm moving forward because I have information I need to get, and I have information to give these attorneys. So,
Wow. And I'm
Catherine
sure
and
you'll
I,
keep people posted on that as it progresses. I know you guys will. And I'm just looking. I want to make sure I give everybody a chance to let people know where they can find your work, and so they can check out all the videos you're doing and the amazing stuff that you're looking into and bringing forward to people. So, Catherine, can let people know where they can find all the work that you're doing on this case and other cases.
You can find me on YouTube. Just look for Catherine Michelle Investigates David Crowley, and Michelle is Michele, and first name Catherine. Catherine Michelle Investigates David Crowley.
Perfect. I'll make sure that I'm going to put links in the chat, guys, for everybody at the end of the show so you guys can get there quickly. Greg, let everybody know where they can find all the work you're doing and all the documents that you provide. That's a great place to start, too.
Yeah, if you just go to thegraystage.com, you'll find pretty much just about everything. There may be a few things I haven't uploaded yet, but you'll find all of our documents, all the photos, the videos, any audio recordings, our podcasts. We do a monthly podcast, all of our different shows. So you'll find everything there. I think that is a great starting point. Also, make sure that you join the Justice for David Crowley and Family Facebook group if you want to stay on top of everything that we are covering. And I want to again say thanks to Dan Hennen for starting that and for keeping that going. And
exactly, yeah,
awesome.
Thank you so much
to our ladies of justice here.
Exactly, and I kind of wanted to bring up to Sophia now. Have you started a YouTube channel yet, Sophia? Because we've been asking you to. Have you done it yet?
no, I haven't done it. I'm on Greg's channel and Catherine's channel.
That is true. I just wanted to rib you a little.
Yeah, I make her do a lot of stuff with me. It's like, because we'll get her on there eventually. Yeah.
Exactly. I hope she does. I mean, we've all encouraging her to do it, and I hope she does. But she does do a lot of work with you, Catherine, and with Greg. So that's, she is out there doing the work for sure. And what about you, Dan, to wrap it up? Where can they find any of your work, or do you just want to promote the Facebook page? Let people know.
My website is uglytruth.info. That's uglytruth, all one word, .info. You could click on the left menu item for David Crowley Case and get a bunch of documents there, links, videos, and radio appearances.
Wow, amazing. And thank you so much, each and every one of you, for joining me tonight. I'm so happy. It was awesome that it just came together with the holiday. And thank you so much, guys. I wish we could have done a third hour. So please look at their channels, guys, and dig into this information. Thank you so much for being here and supporting every week, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Well, I still got a little bit of time here. I got like 30 seconds, guys. So please, check out all the information, guys. Like I said, it's so important that this case stays open and stays active. So thank you so much, guys. Have a great night and stay safe. I'll see you next week.